On Tech News Today, the government may ban phone calls during flights. Plus, things may be looking up for BlackBerry, and a journalist figures out how much money Microsoft is losing on Surface. All that and more coming up right now.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today for Tuesday, August 5th, 2014. This episode is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter makes hiring faster, easier, and cheaper. Post your job to 50-plus job boards with one click. Try ZipRecruiter with a free 4-day trial now at ZipRecruiter.com/TNT. That's ZipRecruiter.com/TNT. And by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. For free 2-week trial and 10% off, go to squarespace.com and use the offer code TNT. Tech News Today is the show where we talk about the tech news with the journalists who report it. Welcome to the show. TriCasting today and pretty much most of the week is Anthony Nielsen. Hello, Anthony. And also my co-anchor today is Joe Panettieri from the great state of New York. How you doing, Joe?
Doing awesome, Mike. How you been?
Very good. Now, you were waving around a vintage video game earlier. Do you still have that handy? Let's take a look at that.
Yeah, let's see. Okay.
Yeah, now what is this again?
So this is one of two back before there was Android and iOS, there was Mattel's electronic football, and then there was Coleco's electronic quarterback. This is the Mattel version, which I think was less popular. I think Coleco with electronic quarterback was more popular. I had them both back in the day, but I'm busy busy checking Craigslist for some of these old things to bring back.
That's
into
cool.
the fold.
You should. And you were telling me before the show you don't have any batteries, so you might want to check Craigslist for that as well.
Right. Yeah, I'd like to do a shout out for AA batteries for all our viewers out there.
Just go to Costco and get a bin full of them. That's what I do. Well, let's jump into the show. The U.S. Department of Transportation may ban phone calls on airplanes during flight. The DOT is developing a notice of proposed rulemaking on in-flight voice calls, but hasn't decided yet what their notice or their rule will say. But the Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that the department's top lawyer, Catherine Thompson, said in a speech at the International Aviation Club in Washington that the department could impose the ban. This is really interesting news, Joe Panettieri, because the FCC was talking about allowing in-flight cell phone use. And now the DOT is talking about banning in-flight phone use. And as I understand it, the DOT's rules trump the FCC's rules. And therefore, if they impose this ban, the ban will stick, and that will be the law of the land, or, the law of, 40,000 feet.
Yeah, we'll see. And I think the big wild card here are the airlines and the lobbying they're potentially going to do here. If you think about it, I think the airlines look at cell phone service very similar to current Wi-Fi service, where it could be a nice add-on perk in the airlines mind, where they're going to charge you $10, $20 a flight, whatever, to get that in-flight cell connection. Personally, I hope we don't move to self-service on the flights, but it'll be interesting to see who really holds the trump card here. I think we're going to hear some loud vocal statements from the airline industry before the government mandates anything.
I think you're absolutely right on that. And, what's interesting about this is not a rule that's being considered for safety reasons. This is being considered because people talking on phones is annoying. And in a enclosed space like an airplane, when you have multiple people talking on the phone, it's really irritating, and that's why they're doing it. Plus, people's attention is diverted from paying attention to the flight attendants, which could theoretically be a safety issue. Now, the airlines contend, according to the Wall Street Journal, that the DOT is overstepping its authority, that this is beyond the DOT's authority, and they should let carriers decide, carriers being the airlines, decide whether they should allow this, and they should also allow the airlines to essentially choose for themselves whether they want to have bans or not, and they can use their various ways that they allow smartphone use calls on airplanes as a way to differentiate themselves. For example, luxury airlines might want to offer this service. They may want to invest in the shielding of the airplanes and have a relay that allows people to make smartphone calls throughout the flight, even across the Atlantic. There are all kinds of possibilities, and the government shouldn't be just putting the kibosh on that universally, and it should be left up to the airlines, and that's essentially what they're saying. So so I don't know how you feel about it, other than just as a passenger. Personally, I would sort of side with the airlines on this, and it should be allowed.
Right.
You know, if it's really annoying to people, then the airlines can impose the ban, and that can be a benefit. Oh, you know, Southwest doesn't allow it. Great, I'll fly Southwest because I don't like it. That sort of thing.
Right.
I think that's the way to go.
It's funny you should mention, great, I won't fly Southwest because I don't like it. That's a whole other side story. But but no, I agree with you. And, I mean, the big thing here is whether I like in-flight sell that service or not. Why should the government be ruling on something before the airlines have even figured out whether they can monetize it or not, whether or not their customers want it or not, et cetera? Let's have some open markets here. But the challenge, though, is look at where open markets have gotten us so far with the airlines. Everyone's complaining about worse and worse levels of service every year, coupled with more and more fees and add-on fees. So it's a slippery slope the airlines are on. But I do hope they at least get the right to decide their fate for themselves rather than bowing to the government on this.
Well, in a second, we're going to hear about some potentially good news from BlackBerry. But first, I want to tell you about ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter is going to help your company succeed, help your department succeed, because the most important choice you'll ever make is who you hire for the important positions in your company, for all the positions in your company. And so ZipRecruiter will help you hire the best person and do it fast. And here's how they do it. They allow you to post to 50-plus job boards simultaneously, and these include Craigslist, LinkedIn, and Twitter, all with a single click. And that will bring your message of the job opening that you have to all these places where the best candidates are scattered. You never know where the best candidate is going to be found, and so ZipRecruiter will help you find them. Once the qualified candidates roll in, ZipRecruiter's easy-use interface will filter them out for you, showing you only the qualified candidates, so the tire kickers and the people who really aren't qualified won't waste your time. So you can find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by more than 200,000 businesses. They also will help you reach out to all the social networks like Facebook, Google+, and Twitter. And that's really, really important because lots of people now just look for jobs on the social networks. So much is happening on social networks, and ZipRecruiter is there. So right now, Tech News Today fans can try ZipRecruiter for a free 4-day trial. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/TNT. It's a special URL. That's ZipRecruiter.com/TNT. And we thank ZipRecruiter for their support of Tech News Today. Well, Joe, it looks like BlackBerry may be ripe for a turnaround.
Yeah, a turnaround, or at least maybe the company has bottomed out. And this, according to, if you read between the lines, a memo that their CEO sent out on Friday and has since been picked up by the media and analyzed by the media. And here to give us some insight is CNET's Roger Cheng. Roger, good to have you aboard. How you been?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you here. Hey, can you give us some insights? What exactly did the memo state? What were some of the key themes in the memo?
Yeah, well, I think the key theme that everyone sort of picked up on was that they were essentially done with the restructuring efforts, that all those layoffs that they've had, the painful transition that they've had to go through to transform themselves is essentially over, and that John Cheng, the CEO, has actually hinted at potentially adding new staff, which is a big change for a company that's really been downsizing in the last few years.
Sure. And in terms of those new hires, are they looking to get marketing wizards who can get the brand out there and do a blitz in marketing? Or are they looking for product development and real technicians who can put some new DNA into the next generation of BlackBerry technology?
I think it's a little bit of both. We saw, the memo mentioned both product and sales. So I can imagine that they want to ramp up their efforts to sell, probably taking a different tack than they did last year when they were trying to be a big consumer brand. This is going to be more of a focus on the enterprise for large corporate customers, governments, anyone who really needs high security and a strong device management service.
You know, it's really interesting that that they're sending out this memo. It's probably great news by the employees of BlackBerry. Just to remind everyone, BlackBerry laid off 40% of its workforce in September, 4,500 people. And of course, as they're sitting there with their neck in the guillotine, they've seen the head of Nokia roll by. And that got them thinking, you know, this thing is looking pretty horrible. But Cheng is a turnaround artist, and he's made a lot of really, really good decisions. For example, they've sold off a bunch of real estate holdings in Waterloo, Ontario, dumped a bunch of other non-core assets. They're partnering with handset suppliers like Foxconn to cut costs, so they're getting really smart about all that stuff. Plus, they recently acquired SecuSmart, which is, we reported it on the show, and that's designed to help BlackBerry improve security. What do you think their direction is going to be, Roger Cheng, going forward? They can't just go in there and go head-to-head with Apple and Samsung. They're going to have to differentiate themselves, possibly as a more secure phone. I think they have a reputation for that. Maybe they're going to go after government contracts more heavily. They have a reputation for that as well. But what do you think their overarching direction is going to be?
I mean, I think you hit it right there. It's more enterprise, it's more government agencies, it's anyone who really needs a secure phone, who's very paranoid about their data. And ultimately, their sales case can be made to any customer that's been hacked. And as we all know, like that companies have been targets, been breached. I mean, there are a bunch of high-profile hacks. These are potential customers for BlackBerry. They can go in and say, hey, our system is far more secure. We have the track record. We have the reputation. Switch over to us. Like they're not going to go head-to-head with Apple or Google or any of the Android phones. I mean, they're not going to be a big consumer play. BlackBerry has said they're going to launch their phones, the Passport and the BlackBerry Classic. They're the two new phones for this year with a fairly large campaign. But I can't imagine it's going to be the kind of campaign that will reach the Super Bowl. It's going to be more targeted. It's going to be smarter. It's going to be going after those C-level executives and the Fortune 500 companies. It's not necessarily going to be mass market like it was last year.
Hey, Roger, one other quick question. To use a baseball metaphor, with BlackBerry 10, it seemed like they were trying to hit a grand slam, trying to launch the ultimate device. Now I feel like John Cheng, the latest CEO, is trying to string together a few singles. He announced roughly a month ago, maybe 2 months, better than expected financial results. More than a week ago, a nice tuck-in acquisition in the security area. And then last Friday, we get this memo. It seems like he's just trying to string together a few small victories that add up to something more. Is that a good way to think of this?
I think that's actually an excellent analogy. It's, BlackBerry's had so much bad news for so long that to have this sort of string of small incremental good news, I think, is a good way to kind of get people looking at BlackBerry in a different way. I think one of the bigger problems is perception and reputation, right? It's a wounded brand. It's a company that last year we weren't sure was going to even survive. And that does a lot for customer confidence, right? And so if you can string together a string of incremental good news, at least it gives your sales team a little bit of extra ammunition to sell BlackBerry services. Like, look, we're not going anywhere. We're not going to die. It's not the end of the world for us yet, and it's still safe to jump on the BlackBerry bandwagon.
They do have a number of advantages, and as Curtis B. in the chat room points out, they're not an American company. U.S. companies have been taking a hit internationally because of the NSA Snowden revelations, and so their tagline might be, hey, we're Canadian. Even though, let's face it, the Canadian services have been doing similar things that the U.S. has, but they don't have the bad reputation. They've managed to avoid that in the shadow of the NSA revelations. Well, Roger Cheng writes at cnet.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at Roger W. Cheng. Thank you so much for joining us once again, Roger Cheng.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Samsung plans to continue doing business with a Chinese part supplier that used children as workers, but 30% less business, according to the company. Samsung fired Dongwan Shenyang Electronics in July after the U.S.-based China Labor Watch found at least 5 children working at the company, a child being defined as somebody under the age of 16. Dongwan Shenyang claims the child workers were hired by a subcontractor. Joe Panettieri, it's really interesting. An interesting element of this is that so much manufacturing is done in China. Child labor is so rife, not just child labor, all kinds of abuses, illegal overtime, unsafe working conditions, environmental problems. And yet most of the time, Apple is the company that gets the lion's share of the blame for this kind of thing, partly because they're such a luxury brand. They make so much money. But you know what? Samsung makes the rest of the money. All the profits that Apple doesn't make, Samsung makes. Right. And so it's good to see them being taken to task as well. What's not good, in my opinion, is this business about doing 30% less business with a company that was found violating.
Right.
I mean, it's not like this is a first offense. This has been going on for years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of like the 2 games for beating your wife in the NFL. It's like, what, does the punishment fit the crime? Come on, shouldn't we have a steeper punishment here? You know, I think what the good news here is whether it's Samsung or Apple, we're seeing the mobile companies in particular work with third-party investigative agencies, third-party watchdog groups who are checking these factories to see what's going on. It's not just Apple directly checking on it or Samsung directly checking on it. You have these third-party watch groups going in, checking the landscape, then reporting back both publicly as well as to the companies. And it's a real mess. At least the companies are doing something about it. But yeah, 30% penalty. I mean, you're either doing business with us and you're doing it right, or you're not doing business with us at all, would be my stance.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other component of this, of course, is the fact that because companies are pressured to use child labor, it indicates a growing labor problem within China. It sounds hard to believe because the population of China is so enormous, but they actually have labor problems. You have to have a certain amount of skill and energy and drive, and you have to be of a certain age to work at some of these factory jobs. And you know, they actually have trouble hiring, and that's one of the reasons that costs of manufacturing in China is going up, and lots of companies are going elsewhere. So, you know, China's monopoly as the global factory for the world is coming to a slow close, and I think that child labor is evidence for that fact. So we'll see how that goes. It's probably a good thing that one country doesn't do almost all of the world's electronics manufacturing.
Yeah, especially with the state of world markets right now.
Exactly. Well, Joe, it looks like Microsoft is kind of suffering financially because of the Microsoft Surface.
Yeah, you know, on the one hand, Microsoft overall, as an overall company, is quite profitable and continues to you know, deliver big results on Wall Street when it comes to profits. But on the other hand, the question a lot of people are asking is, how is Microsoft Surface, that combination tablet notebook replacement, performing? And I tell you, here with some really interesting details is Computer World reporter Gregg Keizer. Now, Greg, great to have you on the program today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Now, Greg, you dug into some SEC filings and did some math. Can you tell us what you found, what you looked at, and what your analysis exposed?
Well, essentially, you know, Microsoft has been selling the Surface since October 2012, so those sales have fallen into 2 fiscal years, the fiscal year 13, which closed out at the end of June 2013, and then the fiscal year 14, which closed June 30th of this year. Mm-hmm. Together, those 2 years, Microsoft's financials have shown that total losses for the Surface have been $1.73 billion, which is not an existential threat to Microsoft as a company, but certainly is real money.
Right. So in other words, Surface has lost $1.7 billion since launch. And Microsoft hasn't stated that, but you looked into these documents and sort of did the math, reverse engineered the math. Is that the way to think of it?
Yeah, some of the details they do disclose. Some they not hide, but some they don't include in the documents that are filed with the SEC, but are available on their investors' website. And as you said, others you sort of have to work backwards with what information is available to come up with a calculation of, say, cost of revenue, which is the amount of money that the company spends to build the Surface as well as distribute and market the Surface. That figure doesn't include things like salaries or R&D. Those are outside that, quote, cost of revenue, unquote. So at a minimum, Microsoft's put, you know, $1.73 billion into the red on the Surface since it launched in October 2012.
There's also the alternative point of view that $1.7 billion is not very much money. You can imagine 2 alternative futures for Microsoft, one in which Microsoft is a dominant operating system and Office software company as it has been in the past, and another is where it's an also-ran, has-been, 2-bit company that's washed up and done for. And in order to get to that future where Microsoft is dominant, they need to invest. They need the Surface. They need a successful touch operating system and platform. They need to get to the next level of desktop and tablet and mobile computing in general. And if the Surface, if investing $1.7 billion or $5.7 billion gets them to the future where they're dominant again, it's really chump change, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. You know, in the context of what they recorded as far as revenue, as far as their operating margin during the course of, say, fiscal 14, you know, the 1.7 is small potatoes. I mean, it was only 3% of what they recorded for fiscal 14 as far as revenue, and only about 9% for the group that the Surface is part of. So, you know, the number itself really isn't damning. You know, what was interesting, of course, to me, and I think to a lot of readers, was the fact that Microsoft doesn't report all of this in more or less plain English, that you really have to dig into these documents filed with the SEC in order to sort of parse what's really happening as far as profit or loss. And Microsoft is certainly not the only company that does that. Virtually every corporation does. They report what they want to report in many instances to make you know, a particular segment or a particular product look good. And when the product's not performing, you know, they decline to report as much information as they may have done in the past.
Yeah, you know, to build on that theme a little bit, when we see the Microsoft financials, very often they'll talk about cloud momentum, and they'll talk about number of subscribers that have gone to Azure or to Office 365 or recurring revenue from the Microsoft cloud effort. Similarly with Apple, when we see Apple financials, we get the actual numbers of number of iPads or iPhones sold. And on the flip side, reinforcing what you're saying about Surface and Microsoft hiding the numbers, when Amazon reports, they barely ever mention anything about cloud services revenue because it's really small in the overall scheme of things. And also with the new Fire phone, they're not going to mention anything financially. So I do understand how companies avoid the numbers and avoid stating it. But here's a big question for you, and this goes back to leadership. Now, Steve Ballmer, if you look at what Microsoft did over the past decade, I mean, Microsoft lost roughly, I think it was $11 billion in their online services from 2005 to maybe roughly 2011 with Bing and the rest. I mean, that shows long-term commitment to some money-losing projects just to be in a market and fend off like Google. Do you think the latest CEO, Satya, do you think he will show that same commitment to Surface if it continues to lose money?
You know, personally, no. I think that he's a different leader, obviously, than Ballmer, and he seems to have indicated, and some of the analysts who I've chatted with, including Ian Dawson yesterday, you know, keyed on some of the things that Satya Nadella has said and the way that he said things. You know, some of his comments seem to indicate that he has less patience with money-losing segments. And especially, I think, when those products, like the Surface, stemmed from, you know, the prior regime. You know, the massive job cuts that were made earlier this summer on the Nokia acquisition, I think, are a very good hint of where Nadella stands as far as money-losing operations when there's no clear path to profitability or there's no clear strategic reason, you know, for doing something. That devices and services model that Steve Ballmer instituted a year and a half ago, Nadella has, you know, more or less refuted and said, no, we're doing things differently. We're going to be cloud first. We're going to be mobile first. And then most recently, you know, he talked about platforms and most importantly, productivity. So, you know, I think it's quite easy to believe that if the Surface doesn't perform, especially in the last 2 quarters of this year as the holiday season comes up, that, you know, Nadella would look very closely, much more closely than Ballmer would have, I believe, at getting rid of those kinds of losses.
Now, Web2885 in the chat room makes a really good point, which is that, yes, Microsoft is losing billions on a tiny market share, but possibly even more importantly, they're alienating their partners. Used to be in the old days, old days being like a year ago, 2 years ago, you wouldn't dare, a company like Microsoft wouldn't dare compete directly with their, well, I guess 3 years ago, compete directly with their partners. That was just something you didn't do. You were either, a hardware manufacturer, or you were a platform company that provided a platform for your OEM partners to build on, and you didn't compete with them. Google completely shattered that model by competing directly and shamelessly with their own partners, and then Microsoft ended up jumping on board. However, Web 2885 also says that it's still true, though, that if they do become the dominant OS again on phones and tablets, it's still worth it, even worth it to alienate their partners. Gregg Keizer writes at computerworld.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at @GKeizer. That's Keizer with a K. Thank you so much for joining us on Tech News Today, Greg.
Hey, thanks very much, guys. Really had a good time. Appreciate it.
I'm glad you did. Thank you so much, and great reporting there.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. A security researcher has figured out how to bypass PayPal's two-factor authentication and hack into an account. Joe Panettieri, this is really an interesting story, in part because this particular researcher has been sort of, talking to PayPal and trying to get them to do something about it. And PayPal has essentially ignored him, according to this analyst. His name is Joshua Rogers, and writes on a blog called Just Another Security Blog. What do you think about this story? I mean, essentially how this works is that he found that there's a special URL tag that goes into the URL for connections between eBay and PayPal. And by going and using the eBay service and logging into the PayPal thing, you're continued to be logged in, and then you can go back to PayPal.com, and you're logged in, and they don't check the two-factor authentication part. And he claims that this is a devastatingly bad security flaw. But what did you think about this story? Do you think this is as bad as he says it is?
Well, I think the big question here, and what we're not privy to, is what was the conversation between Joshua Rogers and PayPal. So he raises this red flag, right, and apparently approaches PayPal to discuss it with them and set off the alarms. And we don't see anything from the mothership. We don't hear anything from the mothership about this. Is this just a hacker crying wolf, or is this something more? I would love to see the dialogue that happened in the background between the two sides of the table here. I'm just not privy to it. I think the bigger issue, there's a couple of bigger issues here. In the Wall Street Journal today, and we'll cover this in our next story, there's a lot of debate going on as to whether or not hacks should be disclosed going forward, whether it's companies or individuals, et cetera. And what's the upside? How much is it is just sensationalized by the media? I think that's the other concern here. Just how much of this is truly a concern, and how much of it is the media feeding on itself and spinning the story into something that is much larger than it deserves.
Well, let's get right into that story. This is about Target and their disclosure of the price of the hack we reported on the show several times.
Yeah. So Target, for the first time, and is basically saying that hack that occurred during the holiday shopping season has cost them nearly $150 million. Now, they're using all sorts of ways to quantify the number. Certainly, what they haven't quantified is the hit it's taken to the brand. Certainly, the brand has suffered. Their CEO was changed. Their CIO was changed. So you've had this $150 million or $148 million price tag, but then there's the executive changes, and then the stock price, and then the consumer confidence, and the list goes on. And where we spin this story forward, Mike, is what you and I were just discussing. The Journal today has an interesting story saying, should these hacks be publicized? Maybe they should just be kept quiet and not overblown and contained, so to speak, privately by the companies. I see pros and cons to that one, Mike. Did you have any big reaction to that Journal opinion piece? Yeah,
I mean, a person named Doug Meal, who's a partner at Ropes and Gray, a law firm, I guess. He was an advisor to Target, and he probably advised them to not disclose. They probably ignored his advice, but his quote in the Wall Street Journal was, if you never disclose the breach at all, then you don't have class action lawsuits. Very practical advice for these companies. They're also there is also some harm to the victims of these attacks when disclosures are made. For example, when Target revealed their hacks, everybody had to go out and swap out their credit cards. That's a lot of effort and work and time and so on. And you know, they don't even know if these credit cards were ever used, whether they were ever fully exposed. So, you know, a lot of the time, as this article points out at the top of the piece, there's a lot of hysteria that happens around these breaches in part because people don't understand that they're probably oftentimes not bad at all. They're not as bad as they sound, but no matter how bad they actually are, people freak out and all kinds of damage is caused.
Yeah, you know, so you wonder, so that $148 million price tag that Target is saying that the hack cost them, would that number have been so high had they not publicized it? Maybe it only would have been $15 million worth of damage, but then there was this, you know, just watershed event where the hack went viral and everyone was talking about it, and now people are buying less at the stores, et cetera. So that's interesting. But let me play devil's advocate, Mike. There have been laws on the books for years now. Out in California, there's a law called CASB 1386, and it basically is a security breach notification law. I won't get into the deep details here. Folks, viewers and listeners, you can find it out on Wikipedia and elsewhere. Again, CASB 1386, and it talks about when you need to disclose information about a potential hack that may have impacted your customers, particularly in California. This law has been on the books. I think my notes here say July 2013, but I think it's actually July 2003. I think it's been on the books for a decade. So I don't know if we can. I think the genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah, and in fact, 47 states have some kind of requirement to notify consumers when there's a data theft, and the Securities and Exchange Commission in 2011 required companies to disclose, quote, material information regarding cybersecurity risks and cyber incidents, unquote. So the question is, what is an incident? What isn't an incident? As is always the case with these rules coming from the federal government, state governments, there's a lot of interpretation which has to be hashed out in court, and that has not happened yet. And so it's, you know, let's say, you know, it sounds cut and dried if you read about these attacks in the news, but they almost never are. Essentially what happens is somebody notices that somebody was in the system. What does that mean? Was anything downloaded? Was anything copied? Were Trojan horses planted? The details, the answers to those questions is the whole thing. If some script kiddie just was inside a server somewhere looking around, nothing has happened. Nothing has been compromised. Nothing has been stolen. Nobody's personal data has been compromised. And so that may be a case where you don't need to disclose. And then there's the huge gray area between knowing nothing happened and knowing something happened, which is what we don't know what happened. And that's often the case in these hacks. And in that case, you know, again, disclose or don't disclose. That's something that we haven't established a best practice for.
Yeah, and also how to disclose. So say you come to the conclusion that we have to say something. Is it just in an SEC filing buried somewhere? Or is it an actual press release? Or is it a press conference? I mean, my God, it's a minefield in terms of how you can potentially handle it or not handle it. Now, back to the Target case, as I recall, one of the things that complicated this is I believe they discovered the hack and sort of sat on it and didn't think much about it for a while. And then after the fact, realized, oh my gosh, this is much bigger than we originally thought. And it just spiraled out of control at that point.
Yeah, and in fact, it was originally disclosed by a blogger, and then Target came clean on it. And that's oftentimes the case when it's leaked out, and then they have to talk about it. And then that was part of a wave of retail stores disclosing that some sort of breach has happened, but somehow because it was so large and so early, Target's disclosure became Target became the poster child for this kind of disclosure, which is really unfortunate news for Target. Great news for Walmart and Kmart or whoever their competitors are, because this has just really been devastating for the company. And as you pointed out, possibly unfairly. Well, in just a sec, we're going to find out some really interesting technology coming out of MIT. But first, I want to tell you about Squarespace. Of course, Squarespace is an awesome place to build a website of any kind. But if you're a blogger and you want to build a blog, it is a fantastic blogging platform. They have layout engine-based editing, markdown support, post by email. Post by email, I love that feature. Almost no blogging platforms support that, and it's such a great feature. You just send an email, and that becomes a blog post. Of course, they have RSS syndication, geotagging, so much more. It's such a great blogging platform. And, of course, mobile apps make it easy to update your blog on the go. If you're really a good blogger, and you know, if you are a good blogger, you know who you are. You have to be on the ball, responding to comments, blocking trolls, doing all the things that, you know, moderating your messages and your comments. And Squarespace enables you to do that from your mobile device, which is really powerful. You don't want to be trapped in your office with a desktop computer, and Squarespace sets you free. They also support configurable sharing buttons, letting your visitors share on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, LinkedIn, StumbleUpon, Reddit, Pinterest, and Tumblr. So you can just share away, and it's highly, highly social. You can even schedule posts to happen in the future. You can publish blog entries with multiple author attribution. So there's several people contributing to your blog. Their byline can just go right in there automatically based on who's logged in when they post. And of course, Squarespace is super easy to use. It's so easy to use that it's actually thrilling to use. That's how easy to use it is. But if you ever need help, they will always provide it 24/7. And the people who provide tech support really know what they're doing, and I can vouch for that personally. So what are you waiting for? Start your free 2-week trial, no credit card required, and start building your website today. When you decide to sign up for Squarespace, make sure you use the offer code TNT, and that'll get you 10% off the already low price, and it'll also enable you to show your support for Tech News Today. Well, MIT eggheads figured out how to reconstruct sound from the tiny vibrations recorded by video on a bag of potato chips. The researchers wrote an algorithm that converts visual vibrations to sound. They can even reconstruct the sound of people talking, and you can understand what those people are saying. The technology collects the movements on all the pixels in a very high-speed video, and then it averages that movement and filters out the noise. And what's left is an approximation of the sound in the room. Let's have a listen to hear what this actually sounds like.
This is what a cell phone was able to record from inside, next to the bag of chips.
So this is the actual sound. This is not the reconstructed sound.
Mary had a little lamb whose fleece was white as snow. And everywhere that Mary went, that lamb was sure to go.
And this is what we were able to recover from high-speed video, filmed from outside, behind soundproof glass.
Mary had a little lamb whose fleece was white as snow. And everywhere that Mary went, that lamb was sure to go.
More evidence, once again, Joe Panettieri, that potato chips are bad for you.
And more evidence that the NSA is probably visiting MIT today to see exactly how that works.
That's right. Somebody just got a job.
Yes.
with the NSA.
and a military contract.
Well, that is the Tech News Today. Joe Panettieri, thank you so much for joining us. You are here every Tuesday, and
Absolutely.
It makes Tuesday a delight to do the show because you are here. Thank you so much for joining us again this Tuesday.
Mike, thank you so much, and have a great day.
All right, you too. Well, I don't know about you, but I subscribe to Twitch shows in 2 ways. I subscribe via HD video, which I can watch on my laptop or my TV. Plus, I subscribe via audio to the same podcast. So I subscribe to every netcast twice. And that way, if I'm standing in line or driving or doing something else, I always have shows on my phone that I can listen to, and I can just become smarter and smarter. And so I always have Twitch shows like Tech News Today available. You can subscribe to Tech News Today on Stitcher. We're rising in the charts on Stitcher. Check it out. On iTunes, on YouTube, Feedly, Yahoo, RSS, so many options, and you can choose your favorite at twit.tv/TNT. And please follow us on Twitter, Tech News Today. TV is our Twitter name. Join us on Google Plus and our Google Plus community. Just search Google Plus for Tech News Today, and you can subscribe to our subreddit at technewstoday.reddit.com. And send us your thoughts and opinions. Email at TNT@twit.tv or leave voicemail 260-TNT show. Don't miss our evening newscast, Tech News Tonight at 4 p.m. Pacific tonight and every weeknight right here on the Twit Network. My name's Mike Elgan. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.